Thank you so much for having me. It is very nice to be at this Understanding Society conference, and I'm going to talk about making surveys smart using apps and sensors to augment or replace regular surveys. And spoiler alert, I don't think we are anywhere near replacing regular surveys with sensors and apps. We might use them to augment our regular surveys, and why I think that is, you are probably going to find out in this talk. So welcome. My name is Vera Toepoel. I am the head of the Methodology department at Statistics Netherlands. Since this year, before I was working at the Department of Methods and Statistics at Utrecht University. You might also know me as the president of the European Survey Research Association, and I'm also the president of the research committee on methods of the International Sociological Association. I have written a book doing surveys online, and the downside of working in an innovative area is the fact that if you write a book, it's very easily outdated. So it hasn't been a bestseller. I still have to work, unfortunately, but it has a very nice cover. So if you are looking for a Christmas present for your colleague, I can recommend it for that. I have to make a note that the opinions I express here are my own and not necessarily the ones of Statistics Netherlands. And also, I would like to acknowledge the fact that what I am presenting here is actually the work of many people, both inside and outside Statistics Netherlands, in particular Utrecht University, I would like to mention. So they were so kind to let me share their slides with you here. So apart from this introduction, this is the outline of my talk. So first, why smart surveys and what are smart surveys maybe? And then I'm going to focus on 4 different types: browser-based surveys, app-based surveys, surveys that make use of external sensors. So for example, your mobile phone can connect via Bluetooth with, I don't know, an activity tracker, or you can have an app on your mobile phone. So external sensors is also a way of doing smart surveys. And I'm going to talk about data donation. And well, I think we have done so many things, but it is no free lunch. It's really hard work. We have seen shifts in, for example, the rise of online surveys. It was clear what the advantages were of online surveys because they were relatively cheap and quick. I can tell you one thing: if you do an app-based survey, it's definitely not cheap. And it would probably also not be very fast. So it's really about different types of data and getting to know different types of information that might augment your regular survey. So smart surveys. I don't know if you are familiar with the term smart surveys. I think it is more widespread at official statistics. But the basic thing is that people own devices, and you can use the technology in those devices smart, so that you are able to collect a specific type of information. So what are the characteristics of smart surveys? Well, first of all, device intelligence. So it can use the intelligence, the computing, the storage of the device. Smart surveys can use internal sensors, so they can employ the sensors available in the device. They can also use external sensors, so they can communicate, for example, via Bluetooth with other sensor systems. They can make use of public online data, so they can extract publicly available data, publicly available online data. They can extract personal online data, so the device can go online and request access to existing external personal data, or there can be some form of linkage consent. So the device can ask consent to link external personal data already in possession of an institute. Okay. Well, with smart surveys come new opportunities. So the big advantage of using smartphone surveys, for example, an app, is that you can record information anytime, anywhere. You can work with pop-up messages. You can record specific behavior or track people basically 24 hours a day. And a main decision that has to be made is whether or not you're going to fully go passive, so that there's basically only tracking and you do not request anything from the respondent or the participant. Typically, you want to have some active involvement of the respondents, and I will come to that later. So with all new devices, with new models of each mobile phone, come more and more sensors. These are basically the main sensors that are on all smartphones. We often use, for example, a magnetometer to determine in what direction someone is moving, or an accelerometer to detect whether or not people are holding their phone or moving their phone vertically or horizontally. Often we use a microphone. For example, if you work with speech to text and you ask people to speak out answers to a survey, for example, and you turn that into a written text. The pedometer is often used by respondents to count their steps per day, but you can also use it in your research, for example, on physical activity. And the camera is, of course, also a way to collect information. What I'm going to talk about today is the use of a camera to make photos of receipts. So if people go out and about and they buy certain things, they get a receipt. And we ask them to take a photo of that receipt for our household budget study. But you can, of course, also use a camera for different types of research. You can ask people to take a photo of their lunch if you want to learn more about their eating behavior, or their surroundings, etc. So the main idea of doing these smart surveys is basically twofold. So the goal would be to ease the response task for respondents, so reduce the burden. We have seen declining response rates. People often drop out or get fed up with our survey. So we would like to come to them and make sure that the thing that we ask from them would be the easiest way possible. And another feature would be that it should lead to more accurate statistics. And again, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but it is not entirely clear, or it does not automatically mean that if you use a smart survey, that it is easier for respondents or that you get more accurate statistics. So but that's the challenge for us, right? So why use sensor data? Basically, there are three main criteria when sensor data might be preferred in addition to or in replacement of a regular survey. There would be the burden. So the survey topic that you have might be burdensome for a respondent because it requires a lot of cognitive effort. A topic that I'm going to talk about today is, for example, physical activity. If I ask you how many minutes are you physically active in a week, it's probably difficult for you. You have to rely on estimation strategies and think, okay, I go running 3 times a week, but do you also need to take into account vacuum cleaning the house, because that's also physical activity? So that would be a topic where the burden, the cognitive efforts of a respondent would be high, and that you can use a sensor for. Centrality is an important topic. So the survey topic is not central to respondents. So they might not know the correct answer because it's just not salient enough to them. Or if the topic is of a non-survey type. So the survey topic does not lend itself to a survey question answer approach to begin with. And in all, again, the idea is to increase response rate, maybe also increase representativity and data quality. So as I mentioned before, there's also always some kind of decision you have to make whether or not the balance goes out to active or passive measurement. Active data collection means that the respondents are involved in interpretation of the sensor task, retrieving information through the sensor task, judging the sensor task, and or submitting the sensor data. So it's not just a matter of, for example, allowing you to track their behavior via GPS, for example, but there is always some kind of check involved in which you ask a respondent, we have collected this information for you, is that correct, or do you need to make any adjustments? Why active data collection? Why not only collect data passively? Now, first of all, because of respondent engagement. So often respondents are a little bit hesitant to allow you, for example, to track their behavior. And if you have some sort of active involvement of the respondent, this would increase respondent control, and this has been proven to increase willingness to participate. A survey can be more enjoyable if you have some active data collection points involved, and also if you want to feedback insights. So that is the nice thing of the apps that we have been using, for example, that you can also feedback respondent behavior, and that might be a reason or might be nice for respondents. And typically sometimes people are scared that this might cause people to change their behavior, but there is actually not that much not that much proven literature that people actually do change their behavior if you feed them back insights. Then we have sensor error adjustment. So the fact that things are recorded via a sensor does not necessarily mean that they are error-free. The sensors also have some errors in it. So then you might want to ask your respondents to check and adjust for errors if they occur in the sensor data. And also from a legal point of view, we have the GDPR in Europe, and that basically means that we have to conform to data minimalization principles. And then it's also good to actively involve participants. So this is the total survey error framework, probably well known to many of you. We have all these different steps, and things can go wrong in each of these steps. And the important thing you have to realize when you are conducting sensor-based research is that you have more steps involved. And basically that means more types of errors and also more points where respondents can drop out. So if you have a survey, you ask people to participate in the survey, and that's that. But if you have a sensor study, you first have to connect with your respondents, with your participants, and then they have to download, for example, an app. They have to use the app. They have to maybe make corrections in the app. So there's like more points involved. And also what we came to realize is that sensors typically measure something else than our survey questions. So if I go back to the point of physical activity, if we have questions about physical activity, they measure something else than the sensors. The sensors are actually recording movement. So if you play sports, if you play soccer for 90 minutes, people tend to say, okay, I'm physically active for 90 minutes, but the device only records when you are really physically active. So if you are standing still for 10 minutes, it only records you being physically active for 80 minutes. And if you think, okay, today I'm not doing any physical activity, you might, I don't know, run to get the train, and then actually that would record as physical activity. So the validity, the operationalization of a construct is also an issue that you should be aware of. Now, the main methodological questions are, of course, are respondents able and willing to participate in this type of research? And how useful and reliable are the collected data from smart surveys? And in all, it's basically a trade-off between representation and data quality, what we already know from the total survey error framework. There are 4 ways to collect data in smart surveys. You can do it browser-based, app-based, external sensors can be used, and data donation. And I'm going to talk about each of these 4 examples. I will be very short on browsers because that's not the main part of this talk. But if you would like to do a browser-based study, it can relatively easily be used, typically for one-time measurement, as you would do with a survey, and it can easily be implemented with JavaScript. So this is an example of where we just simply use a browser-based study, and we ask people to take a picture. And we recorded their location, and then we asked them, I'm sorry, the screenshots are in Dutch, but you get the idea. We asked them at the right panel, is this your current location? Yes or no? So we have a browser-based study in which we use sensors, but respondents are still able to check this information. This can relatively easily be done. This is another example on physical activity. This is together with the University of Mannheim. And they had physical activity research. And instead of asking questions, we asked them to make a squat. So physically movement, we see, for example, with surveys like the survey of health, aging, and retirement in Europe, that people have to do a lot of physical exercises that typically can only be done if you have an interviewer. And we would like to know if we can also do some kind of physical activities when we have an online survey. So we asked people if they would be willing to squat. So people had to use their telephone, put it in front of them, and then do the squats for 1 minute. Did people do that? Yes, some people did. Here we have 3 different types of respondents. So we had people who were not willing to comply. The non-compliance was about 1/3 of the sample. So then if you look at the sensors, you see nothing going on in the left panel. In the right panel, you see people who are some person. This is like a figure of one single respondent that did comply to the request. We had about 42% actually doing squats for a minute. And here you see the sensors really going out and about for the entire minute. And then in the middle, we had someone who was compliant, but he was inconsistent, he or she. So probably the person did a couple of squats, then got tired or fed up and then stopped, which was also about 1/3. So we come to the conclusion that people do participate in this type of research. We do see a selective response, although we typically see that if you have a health survey, that healthier people tend to participate, and health predicts the compliance here as well. We conclude that sensor data can be used to validate performance and compliance, and that it is an objective measure of fitness level. So you can ask respondents to do specific tasks and record, for example, the movement via their own mobile phones. So that's it when it comes to browser-based studies. But now let's focus on apps. The first thing you have to think about is whether or not you want to build your own app or whether or not you want to outsource it. Outsourcing is easy. You just have to have a bag of money and you just pay someone else to do all the hard work. Or you can do it yourself. And for example, at Statistics Netherlands, it is very important that we have full control over not only the fieldwork, but also about the methodology. And you can imagine if you give the methodology and the algorithms, if you leave that in the hands of someone else and some things change, you have a time series problem and then it would be very difficult. So we have chosen to do it ourselves at Statistics Netherlands because we want to have insights and control over the methodology. We want to have a general application that might also be used for different types of surveys. So for example, if we built an app that tracks people's movement, it can be used in a travel survey, but it can also be used in a time use survey or in a health survey. You want to be flexible and adapt your app. And well, this is an example which we have open source. But still, even if it's open source, it might be difficult to use it. So why apps? Respondents are typically more satisfied if they have an app because what you ask of them is just easier if you use an app. Apps are a piece of software, so it can be used to communicate with the respondents. It can be used to add more advanced features than if you would not have an app. For example, if you do a browser-based study. And of course, they need to be developed. The negative downside of apps is that they need to be installed. So people might not be willing to do it, or they might delete the app, and that would increase dropout. So basically, when you use an app, there's more steps, and more steps means that people have more points in time where they can say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So people have to download the app, use the app, log in, consent to sensor data collection. Typically, we also always have some survey questions because we cannot only use an app, we cannot only use sensors, we still need to ask some specific subjective questions or personal characteristics, background characteristics. Sometimes there are some pop-up questions. So using an app basically consists of more steps. And at Statistics Netherlands, we have developed 3 apps. So one for our time use survey, one for our household budget study, and one for our travel survey. In general, we found more or less the same predictors of willingness. So people who use their smartphone a lot tend to participate. People who have a positive attitude toward surveys, who like doing surveys, tend to participate more. Older people, so it is more difficult to get them in, but when they are in, they are very loyal. People who worry about privacy tend to not participate in these type of surveys. People who want to have a lot of control and autonomy over data collection tend to participate less. And then we also see that sponsor matter a lot. So who is doing the survey? Is this a university or is this a commercial bureau that affects willingness? So the time use survey. Here you see some screenshots of our app. This is actually our new app. We are still working on it, but you see that it highly mimics a Google Calendar. So on the left pane, you see orange days. They are some information is completed, but the day is not, how do you call it? It's not finished. People have not submitted the end of day button. In green, you see a day that it has been finished, and in blue is the current day. And then you also see on the second panel, so what a person has done in 24 hours. You see the calendar, and at the right-hand side, you see the main activity was doing homework from 8 o'clock to 20 past 8. So for this time use survey, people have to record for every 10 minutes what they have been doing, from what time until what time, and if they did it alone or with a partner. So this is how it will look in the future. And again, we have different phases. So you have a pre-questionnaire, and then you have this diary of the app. And then also we would like people to allow them to track their GPS coordinates. We sometimes have some pop-up questions to ask them, how do you feel at this specific moment? And then we also have a post-questionnaire. And then you see that these different phrases really result in different types of people participating. So this is actually a screenshot of our old app, but it does the same. So first you see the main activity. What was the time of the main activity? And did you do it by yourself or with your kids age 9 until 9, etc. And then you get in the middle panel, you see what a person has been doing. And at the right panel, you see the pop-up questions. So were you happy? Not at all, totally, etc. So who is willing to participate? So all the people tend to not be inclined to participate in the app. People who have a participation history, so have participated before, we did this in a panel, they were more inclined, as were people who had a higher educational level. People who are extroverts tend to less participate. I have no explanation for that, but maybe you have suggestions. People who are open tend to participate more. People who are conscientious, so this is basically the big 5 personality traits, if you have noticed. People who are conscientious tend to participate less, and survey value and survey enjoyment are positive predictors. Survey burden, of course, a negative one. And also, if people worry about their privacy, we see that they participate less. And here you see the different steps, and also that these different factors have a different effect of each of these phases. So for example, if you look at age, you see that the diary, which is the app, and the pop-up questions, they have a lower response rate. Basically meaning if you ask them to do something new with pop-up questions and an app, they are less inclined to participate. So age is a very strong predictor, and here you can see it as well. So if you look at the pop-up questions and the diary, and also in particular the GPS, older people tend to have a lower participation rates. And that is what we basically see in all of our like app-based surveys, is that older people age is a very pronounced predictor. The thing is, when they are in, they have downloaded the app and they do participate, they tend to be very loyal. We also looked at differences in outcomes. So this is a time use survey. So if we look at time use, we see, if you, for example, look at the dark blue, so the fourth one, the full respondents, so the people who participated in the entire study, those are the people who work more and watch less television. So this is basically the only thing we found. So we were quite happy about that, but it is a specific group that is participating. Then we also checked GPS as auxiliary variable to see if it can give a little bit more context maybe to the data, or they can be used as memory aids. So this is basically how it looks like if you have plotted it on Google Maps. So you see where a respondent went. This is, of course, how it is in your data. So you do need to have some data skills in order to come from this data set to this very nice plot. But the advantage is that you can derive functional locations, so such as home or work, or if people are in transit. There's also a very large category called everywhere. But if you look here, I think this is a very interesting figure. So we have the iOS users and the Android users. And that is a big disadvantage of using apps, is that you have to develop an app for each of these systems, which is awful. But anyway, so if you use at the time use survey, which is, of course, the same across iOS users and Android users. But if you would look at the difference between the time use survey and the location tracking, you see that something is really different between the iOS users and the Android users. So specifically, like the home category is very different. It's much larger, or basically it's too small compared to the time use survey for iOS users compared to Android users. And this is also something to do with the fact how the system record movement. If I understand it correctly, if I remember correctly, iOS tends to record physical location every, I don't know, 10th of a second, while Android users at the Android system only record when people are moving. So this is a different way of measuring, and then you probably get these different results, which is, of course, not what we want, because if we want to measure things, we want everything to be equal. So that is a downside of using apps. So the conclusion, we did find many positioning errors. We had differences in matching success, but they are largely intrapersonal. And this measurement frequency is very important. And that is also why we still need respondents to be actively involved. We cannot rely on sensors alone. Then the household budget study. This is, again, the app that we have built. I think it looks more or less the same. It's, again, the baseline is the Google Calendar. You see with colors whether or not a day was effectively closed, if you still need to work on a specific day, and which day you are in. And then it says which shop did you do your grocery shopping, for example, the date. It also said whether or not it was abroad or online. Of course, more and more people are buying things online, and we don't have a way to scan these online receipts yet. So that's something that we are currently working on. It says, okay, this person bought some eggs and some bread, and it also gives, so it gives the total amount and also the discounts that this person has received. And then in the third panel, you see a photo of a receipt. So people could also scan the receipt, take a photo of the receipt, and then send it to us. And at the right panel, you see basically the summary of what a person has been spending on food, clothing, alcohol, household stuff, etc. So this is a way to feed back information to respondents about their spending behavior. So the smart feature here is the OCR scanning that uses, if people take a picture of the receipt, it detects the information that's in the receipt. And this was actually part of a big Eurostat project. So there were 3 experimental conditions that we have used here. So we used either an interviewer or not. We gave respondents this feedback about their spending behavior directly or after a week. We used the camera function, the OCR editing or not. And we did that not only in the Netherlands, but also in Luxembourg and in Spain. So either people got an invitation and 2 reminder letters, or they got an invitation and an interviewer. We used an incentive of €5 unconditional and 20 euros conditionally at the end. And people who got an interviewer, they get a motivational talk by the interviewer. So this was what the manual entry looked like. I already explained this a little bit in detail. In the third panel, you also see that if people would just type in the A and the L from, for example, the supermarket Aldi, that they immediately received suggestions about the supermarket. And at the right panel, you see the different types of categories. So was it health? Was it communication? Was it, I don't know, clothing, a restaurant, etc. And this is probably the more interesting part in which people, they took a picture of their receipt and they were able to select the parts that was relevant, right? So if you typically get a receipt, it is very long and there is a lot of, I don't know, irrelevant information in it. So people could select the part where we see the brand of the shop, which is we in this instance, and then it gives the address and also the different types of things that were bought and the total amount of expenses and the expenses per category. So that is the scan. And then this is, again, this feedback condition. Now, so what we see in response, we see that, so we have combined is the first line, and then you see the results of the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Spain. So we see some differences when it comes to registration. More people registered in Luxembourg compared to the Netherlands and Spain. We see some differences in active users and incomplete. But if you look at the percentage of active users divided by the registered users, you see that it is about it's 76% for Luxembourg, but in the Netherlands and Spain it's like 84 and 87. So we were quite happy about that. And also when you look at the completes, they are also above the 80% level. So we were quite satisfied with that. If you look at the experimental conditions, you see that the interviewer does generate higher responses and also higher completion rates, but it did not make our sample more representative. So it was basically more about the same type of people. And the direct feedback and the using of the scanning did not or modestly impact response rates and representativeness. Here is a graph showing the time spent in the app. So on the first day, people were very active, and then you see it dies out. And then on the 7th day, you see an increase again for the people who were promised or threatened that the interviewer would come back at the 7th day. So then you see a small increase in the time spent in the app. When you look at the number of entries, in total, they are the same between the interview condition and the letter condition. When you look at the manual entries, you see a higher number of entries for the paper condition. And when you looked at the scanned entries, you see a higher percentage for the interviewer. So this means that if you send an interviewer, the feedback and the explanation that the interviewer is given actually helps in getting more people into scanning their receipts. Then the data quality. So if we compare the data submitted by the respondent and the data submitted via this camera, you see there are some differences. So the correct amount is higher when the respondents entered the information. Also, the difference between what was entered and the receipt was, if it was less than €1, it's far higher if it was submitted by the respondent. Also, the correct number of projects. The difference between numbers is actually the same. And as you know, if you have a receipt, typically every item is in a single row, so that can be easily transferred into a data set. So there the OCR is pretty accurate. And then the in-app editing, so giving the respondents the option to edit, enabling in-app editing partially improves data quality. We did not find an effect on dropout rates, so the fact that you give people the option to edit did not affect the dropout rates, and it did improve the quality a bit. So the challenge would be to let respondents do more editing tasks while keeping an eye on whether respondents are doing this reliably. And as you remember at the beginning of my talk, one of the reasons to use an app would be to reduce respondent burden. Then here you automatically see that that is not necessarily the case, because you might still need to ask a lot of your respondents. Then the travel survey. Again, we have a similar type of app in which people are tracked. So they have to log in, and then they have to give us permission to locate, to track their location. And then they can use information, add information, whether or not it is a stop or a trip, and what was the purpose of the stop. Well, basically, you can look at the last three main rows. We did use an experiment with this, with different types of incentives. So €5 for participating, €5 for registering, €5 for participating, and €5 for ending the 7-day fieldwork period. Or 5 at the beginning and 10 in the end, or 5 at the beginning and €20 in the end. And then if you look at the last column, you see that actually the best data quality we found with the last one. So €5 unconditionally and 20 at the end, which is of course also the highest amount in total, €25 compared to 15 of the other two. This I'm going to skip. So we were ultimately interested in transport detection. So would we be able, while using these GPS coordinates, to predict whether or not people were on a bike, on an e-bike, in the car, or in the metro? So if you look at the diagonal, that was where we did great, but you still see some issues, some respondents where there is a difference between what we predicted from our model and what the respondent told us that he or she was doing. So especially, for example, in cities, but also the difference between an e-bike and a bike can be difficult. So we still have to work on that. So the amount of data is a figure you see here. So in the beginning, you have a lot of data, and then people tend to stop, and you have dropouts. And this is also an interesting figure. So we asked people to use the app for 7 days, but we did not really check if they removed the app after the 7th day. And then you see here that you actually are collecting more still information after the 7 days. And you might think, oh, that's nice, but actually it is not, because with the GDPR, we ask permission to record only 7 days. So we have to make sure in future research that we stop collecting data after the 7 days to be GDPR compliant. So the conclusion, we did find that the usability test and the field test provided important insights in the need for methodology and IT. People were willing to participate, but incentives are still important. And also the consideration of active and passive measurement is an important one. And you probably still want to have your respondents being active for a specific amount of time. The quality of the entered data was okay, except for the way of transport, where we are still working on. The stop detection was robust for our parameters, but still we are trying to find out if it can be improved by using geo-context. We did not find a problem with battery usage, because that's also typically something that's an app, if you use an app, that can really drain the power of the battery. And of course, we find, again, a difference in type of sensor. So we do find differences between Android and Apple. Then external sensors. I'm looking at the time. I have still some time for that. One way that you can use an external sensor is by using your mobile phone and letting it communicate with an external sensor. So for example, if you look at activity trackers, many people have these activity trackers nowadays, and then you ask people to, for example, put information in the questionnaire. So I ask you, if you have an activity tracker, what is the amount of steps that you have taken this day, and please enter it in my survey. You can also ask respondents to upload a spreadsheet or create a download package. And you can use this information, of course, to augment surveys. The issue with activity or with physical activity is, as I mentioned before, that people find it very difficult to estimate their physical activity. They tend to overestimate or underestimate their physical activity, as this figure shows. There are many different types of trackers, so they can be wrist-worn or hip-worn. And we did an experiment in which we asked people in a lab setting to wear all these different types of sensors. And then we came to the conclusion that the active pole, which is on the right-hand side, which is placed on top of the leg, would be the most accurate sensor. And typically for the Netherlands, because we do a lot of biking, and then a wrist-worn device would not really record biking that well. If you would do a research on physical activity and you use this research-grade device, you have to send it out. People have to wear it. You have to get it back again. You have to clean it. You have to read out all this data. So it is, again, a lot of steps. But it does provide a very nice overview. So here you see in blue, this is a rest phase, and in red, this is a physical activity phase. And you can also see the difference when it comes to sports. So soccer looks very different in this feedback sheet than if people are running, for example. So we wrote a report about these different trackers, if you would be interested in that. And then here you can see that we did 4 pilots, and the consent of wearing this active pole, this accelerometer, was basically more or less the same. It varied between 47 and 56%. So about half of the sample was willing to participate, and the consent differed because different types of samples were used. But in general, we found that if you ask people to wear it, about half of the sample in the Netherlands was willing to do it. Of course, also when you use these devices and people have to send it back, some get lost in the mail or they are not returned. So we are doing next year some research about whether or not the use of interviewers would increase consent and reduce the number of meters that get lost. So very quickly, what we found is that people are willing to participate. People with their own accelerometer, so for example, a Fitbit, they are physically more active than the general population. And we find that promising feedback, so these very nice feedback sheets with red and blue, actually lowered participation rate. And that's always a thing, because we often see that giving people feedback, actually, it does not really increase response rate. It might actually decrease response rates, but people tend to appreciate receiving feedback. So that's always an issue. We did find a complicated relation with incentive level, not clear what's going on there. But targeted recruitment. So we see typically that people who are physically active participate. And if we do an experiment and we say, okay, we target it to people who are not physically active, and then we say, okay, it's very important that you participate, and you might have a higher physical activity than you might anticipate for, did not affect response rates at all. Then we also did an experiment with people's own activity trackers. So we ask people to either enter the information from their own tracker into a survey or to upload a spreadsheet. We see that more people are willing to participate when they need to enter the information in the survey than when we ask them to upload a spreadsheet. And one of the big issues is that the information in these different trackers with these different brands, they differ. So for example, Garmin tends to double the number of minutes when you are highly physically active, when you are very intensely physically active. So that makes it very difficult to compare these different brands. And typically, you don't have access to the raw data, so that makes it very difficult to use them in research. When we look at the number of steps between these commercial devices and the research-grade device, we actually see no differences. So they tend to be very accurate in that. But we come to the conclusion again that the questionnaire and the tracker measure different things. So lessons learned. They can be used, but they measure something different than physical activity surveys. And you need to be aware of participation rate and bias. I'm going to skip this one because I'm running out of time. So a little bit more about data donation. So there are different ways to do that, but one of them would be via a data donation package, in which you ask people to request this data donation package from their data controller. So for example, if people are on Facebook, you ask Facebook, a participant asks Facebook, please give all my personal information. Then the participant downloads all this personal information in this data donation package to their own device, for example, their telephone. Then the participant goes to the extraction website, which would be the website that you have built as a researcher. And then you have some algorithm, you have some Python codes extracting the relevant features. And then you give that information back again to the participant and ask them for consent. So is it okay if we use this information in our research? Why is this an option? Because of the fact that there are new laws now with the GDPR. It has a lot of downside, but it also has an upside that there are articles such as article number 15, the right of data access, and article 20, the right of data portability, that make sure that different organizations, different brands needs to provide personal information to respondents. Well, linking that data is not always easy. We have done a meta-analysis on that, in which there are not that many studies yet. So we did an inventory of all experimental conditions that have been used in the literature. And we found that only sponsor and wording were actually the ones that, that had enough studies that we could really do a meta-analysis on. So when it comes to sponsorship, we see that academia works best when it comes to consent rate. So more people tend to consent to data linkage when the sponsor of the research is from academia. Companies are actually the worst, and governments and nonprofits are in between, as you can see here. So academia is the highest, and the commercial businesses are the lowest. And also wording affects the compliance rate. So as you can see here, if you would frame it as a cost, so it will cost you more time. If you would not participate, this results in higher compliances. So what works in the beginning of the survey, or if you place the request in context, if the purpose of the data request would be more beneficial for society, if it is the first request, if it's not at the end of the survey, if you give logical arguments, if you give people an incentive, if you use interviewers, if you give people the option to opt out, and if there is a shorter study duration. Relatively straightforward. We did not find an effect of the data type, the data release options, giving people control over the information, the type of participants, the text length, and the topic. So the conclusion would be, if you would use data donation, provide reasons for participation, have a trustworthy sponsor, and show the relevancy of the research. And then I come to my conclusion. As I mentioned in the beginning, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There are issues when it comes to data processing. If you use sensors, you get a lot of data, very privacy sensitive information, and you really have to rely on machine learning strategies. This is what you would like to have. This is what you get. So there is a big difference in, or you need to have particularly good data skills. Again, with the accelerometer data, you get this raw data, which is might be difficult to handle. The data sizes are enormous if you use apps and sensors. Also, data transmission is difficult. And yeah, you really want to work with standardizations of protocols, of algorithms. But the good thing is that more and more is open source. And then building an app is not easy, especially if you want to do it in-house. It does require a lot of work and a lot of money. But that's it. Welcome to the future. Using apps is a way of collecting new types of data that can be used in addition to survey questions and to give us more understanding of what the respondent is doing. That's it. Thank you so much.